Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor K.R. Sambasivarao, our other panelists for today. And then we also have Professor O.P. Tripathi of the Department of Environmental Science as our panelist today, and then Dr. Keshav Kumar Upadhyay, who is seated next to him from the Department of Forestry, Mizoram University. Then all members, attendants, participants today. We are going to have a very interesting topic today. And for our speaker, let me take the honor to introduce him. Professor Rajendra P. Shrestha, he is the Dean of School of Environment, Resources and Development at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. And he's also the co-founder of the Ostrom Center for Study of Natural Resources Governance. So Professor Shrestha is a full professor in the field of natural resources management at the School of Environment, Resources and Development at the AIT, or Asian Institute of Technology. He has more than 20 years of experience in teaching the postgraduate students and guiding postgraduate research. He has already 22 PhD under him, and there are 80 master students having graduated under his guidance. He also holds 6 years of experience in undergraduate teaching. His major research interests include the understanding human dimension of land use and cover and its changes, and the links between land use, climate, and food security. He has previously worked for the government of Nepal as well, and also the United Nations Environment Program. So his research collaboration is very extensive. It stretches to a number of international organizations like the FAO, the UNDP, the SIDA, the GIZ, and the IUCN, even including public and private sectors and universities all over across, especially the Southeast Asian countries. So he has completed a lot of sponsored research projects, which has now amounted to 29, and he has more than 70 papers in international peer-reviewed journals. He has co-edited 5 books. He has co-authored 19 book chapters, 56 articles, conference proceedings, as well as he is the editorial member in 5 journals, and he is a reviewer in over 40 different journals. We will not continue much further with his introduction. He has a lot. I think if necessary, he may add some more when we gave him the time. So after his presentation, there will be a Q&A, which will be moderated by Professor O.P. Tripathi. And then there is Professor Keshav Kumar Upadhyay, who will give the vote of thanks. And before we give Professor Rajendra his time, I would like to invite Professor, our Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R. Sambasivarao, if he has anything to say, and then Professor Rajendra can start after our Vice Chancellor. Sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. John. Nothing to say, only welcome Dr. Rajendra Shrestha ji for this webinar, and also I thank him for accepting our invitation. Though he is very busy, it is awaited since almost 2 months. I've been corresponding with him since December. So in December, we could not conduct it because vacation time for our university. So we postponed for January, and physical classes will be there like that, I thought. So it was almost possible only in April. So it is almost waiting for 6 months. So I thank him very much for accepting our invitation and giving us guidance. And I also thank him that he is going to encourage our Mizoram University faculty also to go and work in Asian Institute of Technology in an exchange program. So that also we will explore with this kind guidance and help. We will definitely explore that particular possibility. Thank you very much, Rajendra ji, and I over to John.
Thank you. So can I share my slide now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, on the outset, I'd like to thank the Mizoram administration, in particular to Professor Sambasiva Rao, who actually extended this invitation since last December. But as he just mentioned that because of our schedule, we couldn't do it. And lately, I also heard that he didn't have very good health. Hopefully, Professor Rao, you are well recovered now and you are in good health. For that reason, I like to thank very much,
Thank you,
to
sir. Thank you.
have this opportunity to know more colleagues, especially from the Mizoram University. Of course, I happen to know one colleague, Professor Tripathi, and that is good to reconnect again. And thanks to Professor John for introduction. If you want to know more about me, there is this website here, which I created when I was younger than this, but it is almost up to date, maybe kind of 90% up to date. Website is there. So if any colleagues wanting to know more about my work and looking for some partnership in the future, I would most welcome. Now, assuming a majority of audience as students, now in this forum, I chose this general topic with a discussion with our Vice Chancellor, Professor Rao, on the climate change, as this is a major global change issue and the biggest concern for human and ecosystem. So in next 40 to 50 minutes, I will touch upon what is climate change, how do we know climate change is happening, what causes climate change, why does it matter to us, and what is needed to be done. So that is what I will be trying to, shed some lights, because this is a huge topic. So as you know, while we talk about it, we know that part of India and Pakistan is experiencing severe heat wave currently. So my name is Rajendra Shrestha. And I am working at the institute called Asian Institute of Technology that Professor Tripathi gave the introduction earlier. This is located in Thailand and is an international postgraduate institution providing engineering, environment, and management education and research, focusing on sustainability and social impact issues by offering master's and PhD degrees. We do not have an undergraduate degree. It is a small university with nearly 1,600 students from about 48 countries. Though small, but there are some 300 plus sponsored ongoing research projects at any time of the year, working with more than 200 partners around the world. Our 40 plus academic programs in 3 schools, called as School of Engineering and Technology, School of Management, and School of Environment, Resource and Development, focuses on 5 thematic areas, namely food, energy, water, infrastructure, technology, policy, and society. The 4th area is smart communities, and the 5th thematic area is climate change. I belong to the Natural Resource Management Group. I also contribute to another academic program called as Society and Environmental Governance. And also I actively involved in our another program, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Now, moving to the topic of today. As I said, I mainly targeted the student audience. So I'm going to give some of the basic on what is climate change and how do we know climate change is happening. Now, before we really jump into the climate change, what it is, talking about atmospheric radiation balance, the near surface atmosphere of Earth is warm. This is possible as the sun powers Earth's atmosphere by radiating energy at very short wavelengths, predominantly in the visible or near visible, for example, ultraviolet part of the spectrum. And this heat input from the sun causes Earth to warm. Some of the heat are absorbed and some lost from the Earth by radiation. This causes Earth to cool. This causes Earth to cool. But heat loss from the Earth is not equal to the heat input from the sun. So that difference is called as the net irradiance. So when there is balance between incoming and outgoing energy, the Earth's average temperature remains stable. To look further, there is a complex process going on between incoming and outgoing radiation as affected by different level of reflection, absorption, or back radiation in the atmosphere and the Earth's surface. All this complex process determines the radiation balance as a greenhouse effect, something like that, which is the reason why atmosphere has certain degree of warming. And hence, there is a possibility of existence of life on Earth. How much warm greenhouse effect is? So with Earth's core, the central part of some 5,500 degrees Celsius, and considering the heat loss from core to outer surface, the temperature of Earth near surface atmosphere would be something like -18 degrees Celsius in the absence of heat from the sun. So in reality, due to heat energy from sun, the average Earth's temperature is about 15 degrees Celsius, the average temperature. Some parts are hot, some parts are colder, so average is about 15 degrees Celsius, making Earth, inhabitable. In other words, some 33 degrees Celsius equivalent of warmth is retained in Earth's atmosphere due to the greenhouse gases, popularly you may know like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, absorbing and re-emitting those infrared radiation. Now that phenomenon is called as the greenhouse effect. Now, with that understanding, if you define the climate, that difference between incoming and the outgoing radiation energy determines the average temperature of any given climate. When a specific net irradiance level is maintained, then the climate of that place will be stable. But we need to remember that the climate system of a location is a complex, interactive system consisting of the atmosphere, land surface, snow, oceans, and other living things, even so on. As you may know, weather is the state of the atmosphere at a given time and place with respect to variables such as temperature, moisture, wind velocity, and barometric pressure. So climate is the average weather, basically the statistical description in terms of the mean and variability of those variables over a period of time, classically 30 years, as defined by World Meteorological Organizations. That's what the climate is. And if you look at the history of the information about climate, it probably is a little more than 100 years ago that we have the historical data of climate available. There has been a lot of attempt to classify the climate of the world by different people. And the one what you are looking at here is one of them from the Köppen classification system. But there could be, there are indeed other climate classification system also. Now, IPCC defines climate change as a change in the state of climate that can be identified by changes in the mean and or the variability of its properties, and that persist for an extended period, typically decades or longer. So in other words, it is also the long-term shift in the temperature and the weather pattern or change in greenhouse effect, because the climate is characterized by the greenhouse effect. If there is a change, then that is the climate change. just to understand in short. Now, what about the science of climate change? Tracking back the science of climate change, Swedish scientists warned the warming consequences of coal and oil burning on climate, more than 130 years ago, probably. So almost after 90 years of that warming, Montreal Protocol was adopted as an environmental treaty for reducing the chlorofluorocarbons. So in the following year, NASA scientists reported that warming is already happening. It was the same year Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was created. In short, IPCC. So the job of IPCC is to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessment on climate change, its implication and potential future risk, as well as to put forward adaptation and mitigation option. As you may know that IPCC has been producing a lot of these reports, and of them, the assessment report 6 or the 6th assessment report is just out the weeks ago. So in 1992, UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, was adopted as the international environmental treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system by stabilizing greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. Now, there are a lot of such kind of international agreement ongoing. I have listed only a few. Now, one of the significant was the Kyoto Protocol that was signed in 1997 and ran from 2005 to 2020, which was the first implementation of measures under the UNFCCC. It required developed countries to reduce emission by an average of 5% below 1990 levels, but the treaty did not compel the developing countries. So it did not ask the developing countries to mandatorily reduce the emissions. So Kyoto Protocol was superseded by the Paris Agreement, which we popularly know, currently, which is still under effect. And the COP26 was just held a few months back in Glasgow in November, December 2021. And this Paris Agreement is the first deal which entered into force in 2016. And by 2020, the UNFCCC had 197 state parties, what we popularly known as the Conference of the Party. So it is a supreme decision-making body, that is the Conference of the Party, that meets annually to assess the progress and dealing with the climate change. And as I just mentioned earlier, that the last one, the COP26, was held in December 2021. Now, if you look at further that how the warming is happening, the last 4 to 5 decades are the warmest decades in the history in our Earth atmosphere. And on top of that, the last decade, for example, there are much more warmer years, warmest years to be precise, 2016, 2020, 29, etc. All of them, the 9 continuous warmest year in the very, very recent past, that is the last decade. Now let's examine some of indicators of climate change. This is coming from NASA. NASA's modern temperature records go back well over a century to 1880. Left side image gives an impression of relative warming in 2020, and the bottom image is of the 2020. This is of the 1880. Okay, basically somewhere 1880. So this gives the relative change in the temperature in this period. So there is a little video to show the changes, that what are the anomalies of the temperature in different parts of the world. So you can see that how those redness are increasing. So darker the red color, that tells us there is a more temperature change or more warming in those areas relative to 1880. Now moving on, Earth climate warming has warmed at unprecedented rate due to human influence for about last 200 years. Last 5 decades, as I already said, have been the most warming decades in the history of the Earth climate. And we also saw earlier that last 9 years were the warmest year in the last decade. Now, this left chart shows the change in global surface temperature reconstructed from paleoclimate archives. Means, as I said, the actual empirical data we find here probably are 100 or little more than 100 years. So that means the data for the past has to be recreated, reconstructed by all this backcasting, projection, etc., etc. And there have been a lot of work on that going on. So this is the left chart, so the change in global surface temperature reconstructed from paleoclimatic archives and also from the direct observation. So this part reconstructed and this part is the observed data. Now the vertical bar on the left shows the estimated temperature during the warmest multi-century period in the last 100,000 years. Okay, 100,000 years. Now the right-hand side shows change in global surface temperature over the past 170 years relative to 1850 to 1900, and annually average response to both human and the natural drivers, and to only natural drivers. So this is only to natural drivers. This is combined human and the natural drivers. Now, this is to note that change due to natural drivers is minimal, implying majority of change can be attributed to human-caused drivers. Human-induced warming reached approximately 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels that we refer to 1750 or around that time, and that level already reached in 2017, increasing at 0.2 degree Celsius. Now, this observed data refers to the data which are measured in the different stations all around the world that keep track of the air and the sea temperature. Where has been more warming? Now, the upper chart shows average global temperature and land surface average temperature. Globally, average land surface air temperature has risen more, that is about 1.53 degrees Celsius, than the global mean surface temperature of 0.87 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial period to the present day. So in lower chart, we compare average temperature increase in land and ocean. It shows average ocean temperature increase is about only 0.7 degree compared to much higher increase by about 30% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In other words, now the land part or the terrestrial part of the Earth has been experiencing much more temperature increase compared to the ocean part. Now I'm mentioning it because this is where all our activities, most, if not all, majority of our activities are located, particularly on the land part, with regard to the livelihood, with regard to industry, with regard to agriculture, the settlement, and so on. There are other indicators that tell us the climate is changing. For example, rainfall. It shows change in rainfall extreme, both decrease in brown color and increase in the blue color. When compared between 100 years average and the 50 years average, the observed rainfall are, more in the recent years, as we see the differences or the variation with the increase and decrease in the recent past compared to the long past, means the average of the 100 years. So is the case with the sea level rise. Data collected from coastal tide gauge records on the left and the satellite observation on the right tells us that sea level is rising. The rise has been about 3.3 millimeter per year in last 20 years. So the rate in the last decade, however, is nearly double that of the last century. The lower left and right charts show the sea level change in different parts of the world in 1992 and 2010. Red areas corresponds to higher rise of sea level. So this is actually this is a website here. If the students are interested to see, you can actually look at for every years. You can just move the cursor and see that which part of the oceans, have become more increased in terms of the sea level rise. Ice mass, on the other hand, of the Earth are disappearing due to increased temperature. In case of Arctic sea ice, NASA reported the decline in ice mass at the rate of nearly 13% per decade. As you can see in the image below, that how a substantial area of the Arctic ice has decreased in the last 40 years. Similarly, Antarctica has lost ice sheet at a rate of 140 gigatons annually. It has even, there are the data saying that the maximum was 279 gigatons. Some of the records even says that. So similarly, Greenland lost ice sheet accordingly, about 150 to 250 cubic kilometers of ice per year between 2002 and 2006. There are also issues with the glacier melting, not only the big chunk of the ice on the Earth's surface, but in our mountains where there are glaciers. So as you might have heard in Himalayan region and similarly other mountains, there are a lot of case studies, the evidence that glaciers are melting. Now the issue is not only about losing ice mass, but this phenomenon of glacier retreats, that effect on the water cycle, albedo effect, which causes warming of the soil and atmosphere. Now scientific evidences suggest that climate zones have shifted poleward in both hemispheres because of the ice melting, and the growing season has on average lengthened by about 2 days per decade since 1950s in the northern hemisphere, as reported by the recent report from IPCC, that is the assessment report 6. Now this recent study in particular shows the expansion of the vegetation, as depicted here in these green colors in the Himalayan region in last 20 years. So in other words, there were no this vegetation sighted or found 20 years before. But now, when they observed, they found that there is a growth of the vegetation, and which is possible due to warming. If you remember our succession theory in the ecology class. There have been observed changes in weather and climate extremes, like this one again coming from the very new report from IPCC AR6. This is about like hot extremes, heavy precipitation. Like earlier I mentioned that we are experiencing severe heat waves. That is an example. Heavy precipitation, agriculture and ecological drought. On topmost chart, increase in temperature extremes are observed in 41 regions in all the countries around the world. So in here, if you want to see, now this one hexagon is actually the South Asia sub-region or Southeast Asia and so on. So if the brown is indicating all increase in terms of the hot extremes. Similarly, 19 regions have increased precipitation and 12 regions have increased drought situation in the lower charts. Now, the most important story is about the carbon dioxide concentration. This is what we think of when we talk about climate change. We immediately think of the CO2. Climate change is due to increased concentration of the actually greenhouse gases. There is not only one, there are few, although mostly, we hear about carbon dioxide, methane, and the nitric oxide, and they trap more radiation, causing the warming. And there is substantial evidence that the CO2 has tremendously increased in our atmosphere. CO2 release through human activities such as deforestation and the fossil fuel burning, as well as natural processes such as respiration, volcano eruption, is the reason for increase in the CO2. The chart on the left shows CO2 levels in the Earth's atmosphere during the 3 last glacial cycles reconstructed from the ice cores has never increased this level of 300 ppm for thousands of years until 1950. So this is the zero is considered as the 1950 year until 1950. But after that, which is shooting very high in terms of the CO2 concentration. At present, this is about 418 ppm as observed by NASA. This is a record of 15 February, means maybe 2 months back. Okay. So lower two charts show the tropospheric carbon dioxide, and the reddish color refers to almost all part of the Earth has exceeded 400 ppm level of the carbon dioxide. Now, we basically know that what is the reason which we mentioned about the natural cause of warming and the human cause. Yet let's see what are the causes of the climate change. Climate change can be caused due to natural internal process, which can be called as external forcing. The contribution of warming due to natural process is minimal, although the natural processes include such as atmospheric phenomena itself, ocean currents, and the tidal forces, volcanoes, continental drifts, and even the sun's radiation itself. But the evidence suggests that climate is being impacted since industrialization at unprecedented scale, as you might have seen widely used chart on radial forcing due to anthropogenic causes since 1750, which I showed you earlier. And hence, UNFCCC even defines climate change is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere in addition to natural climate variability. Now, IPCC further goes in its report AR6, it mentions that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere. So there is no doubt. Okay, warmed atmosphere, ocean, and even land. As can be seen here, observed warming in the last decade was 1 degree higher relative to 1850 to 1900. All of them caused by this 1 degree higher, all of them caused by the human influence. This is through the release of the carbon dioxide gas, non-CO2 greenhouse gases, and other anthropogenic aerosols, as shown in the right-hand chart. So what is the global net anthropogenic GHG emission? As shown in the upper main chart, the global net anthropogenic emission, which have continued to rise across all major groups of GHG, from about 38 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent per year to nearly 60 in last 30 years. The global emission of 38 in 1990 has reached now in 59. CO2 is a major GHG as the proportion of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and industry has increased from 59% to 64%. If combined with CO2 from land use, and land use change and forestry, CO2 stands at the three-fourths of the total greenhouse gas emission, becoming much more important GHG to be addressed. Of course, methane and nitrous oxide are at 18 and 4% of the total greenhouse gas emission. Now, there are several sectors. They are responsible for GHG emission, as you can see in here. Just to summarize, energy use in different sectors is responsible for nearly 75% of the global total greenhouse gas emission. Now, if we break down energy use in industry accounts for 24.2%, transport 16%, energy use in buildings 17%, AFOLU, that is called agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector at about 18%. And also the putative emissions and unallocated fuel combustion combined about 13.6%, and waste and industry about 8.4%. Now, emissions have grown in most regions. Whatever regions it is, it has grown. If you see the 1990 to 2019 data, but are distributed unevenly, both in present days and cumulatively since even 1850. Average of 1850 to 2019, which is not shown here, the South Asia averaged 4% in this long average. And the top three were North America, 23%, Europe, 16%, and Eastern Asia, 12%. But if you look at the recent past, since 1990, actually Eastern Asia is the top emitter, responsible for 27% of the total emission, followed by North America, South Asia contribute about 8% and so on. Okay, that you can see in the chart. Now, if you look at the country-wise emission, world total emission has increased, that we know already. And today, top 5 countries, that has the quota of highest emission would be China, as you can see, is a big circle. Okay, and then you have the USA, which is not shown here because I clipped only our region mostly. Then there may be India, Russia, and Japan. So India value is about here, so you can estimate the value may be double or much more. Okay, so India emission has increased by more than 20 times compared to this 1960 value, and this in last 60 years. But if you look at per capita emission, the story is different. If you look at the country-wise, this is a huge one. But if you look at per capita emission, it is for 2018. There are other countries like Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Bahrain. They have much more emission compared to many of other countries. Even USA that has only the 11th rank, if you look at the per capita, whereas India ranks as 117th in the per capita emission. Now, why does it matter to us? It matters because there is widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere. These changes are impacts on various ecosystems and challenges, human capacity, and well-being of the future. Like this was a very shocking images, okay, which says in 2019, they say that Alaska sea ice completely melted for the first time in the recorded history. So people never got to see those kind of naked, bare, rocks. So first time in the history, it completely lost the ice. So similarly, there are other such kind of evidences about the rain in Greenland summit, which never had been. Okay, first time again in the recorded history, the news was in August 2021. So there are a lot of such kind of evidence of the change or the impact is happening. Now, this is coming from, again, the new report of assessment report 6 released recently from IPCC. This is about the observed impacts of climate change on ecosystem. It means climate change has already altered terrestrial, freshwater, and ocean ecosystem at the global scale, regional scale, with multitude impacts evident. Impacts are on ecosystem, structure, species, geographic ranges, timing of the seasonal life cycles, for example, phenology. One example you saw from the ice melting in the Himalaya. Now, the other impacts include diverse adverse impacts on water security, food production, health, people's health and well-being, and cities, and the settlements and infrastructure. Now, vulnerability of ecosystem and people to climate change differs substantially among and within regions, driven by the patterns of intersecting socioeconomic development, unsustainable ocean and land use, inequity, marginalization, historical and ongoing patterns of inequity, etc., etc. So approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in the contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. For example, if you see here, the changes observed in case of Asia show all kinds of changes and in their relative magnitude in terms of impact. And there are other changes in other parts of the world as shown in these regions. Now, the impact is not only on the ecosystem, but also on the human system with regard to, the one I mentioned earlier, the water scarcity, food production, health and well-being, cities, settlements, and the infrastructure. So these circles indicating the magnitude of the impact. Now, plus minus indicate where the impacts are not completely in one direction. There are both type of impacts observed in case of agricultural production, and that makes sense because the warming may open up the new areas suitable for agricultural production. So in that case, the production in that area will be added, means increase. But warming in already agricultural area, if increase, may not be suitable for the production. That could be the negative impact. Now, the impact does not limit to what it is now, but the risk is impact may be more in the future. So the bigger worry is that this impact will continue in future if we do not have adequate actions. It is because that the future shows that with the likely implementation of policy, as mentioned in this so-called NDC, nationally determined contributions announced prior to COP26, the people have analyzed it and the global emission continue to increase according to that policy analysis as mentioned in the NDCs of the different countries. So emission continue to increase. In other words, warming continue to increase too in all the scenarios, okay, as shown in this right chart. So as the projection shows, the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the emission level should be brought down to below 20 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent by about 2050. Okay, so that is the need in terms of bringing down the emission and the warming to reduce the impact. This will need very high ambition and emission reduction activities. Now, this is a news from one of the platform from India, where agriculture experts have warned that an unusually hot March and April this year, and that may cause damage to the summer crops, particularly green gram and the black gram, which are grown in the Indian subcontinent between Rabi and Kharif crops. Experts say the maximum temperature for summer crop is about 35 degrees Celsius, and the crops will be damaged if the temperature reaches more than 40 degrees Celsius. So that's, summer moong and black gram, they are the crops which will be affected. So that was the news from one of these news outlets in India. Now, with the increased emission and warming in future, we'll also have the impacts, because as we say that if there is a warming, that means that's going to create more impacts. There will be risk of likely future impacts in that case to natural ecosystem, and also the risk to human. IPCC typically assess the 6 sector ecosystem services. That is one sector: food, another one, human habitat, health, infrastructure, and water. The major future impacts, for example, in Asia are increased flood, damage to infrastructure, livelihood, and settlements, increased drought-related water and the food shortage, and heat-related human mortality. Similarly, a number of similar impacts in other regions. So this is the different regions and the projected impacts in the future in different time periods with the different temperature increase. Now, if you look at a specific sector, for example, agriculture, the impact may differ from place to place. If we specifically look at this case, for example, the projection tells us globally, agricultural yield will decline by 16% without carbon fertilization. Possibly yield reduction in agriculture that may be 30% by 2050 in Central and South Asia. Central and South Asia, as shown here, and the corresponding color, for example, this is a huge dark red. So increased CO2 level due to increased emission can increase photosynthesis. So people also, projected it as the with carbon fertilization. So in that case, the projected yield is still will be reduced globally, but that may limit to only 3%, because with the carbon fertilization, there will be more photosynthesis. In other words, there will be the expected more production. Now, that was just one example on agriculture, but there are similarly so many such, impacts in all the sectors, including urban, in the forestry, or the water, biodiversity, and so on. Now, this is a specific chart on the climate change vulnerability, where one of the organizations called Maplecroft that came with this. So there were about 42 indicators used, representing social, economic, and environmental factors to assess the national level vulnerabilities across 3 core areas: the exposure to climate-related natural disasters and sea level rise. The other core areas are human sensitivity in terms of population patterns, development, and so on. And the third as the adaptive capacity of the country's government and infrastructure. So using those 42 social, economic, and environmental factors, this is showing the relative vulnerability of the climate change. Now, the dark red represent extreme, and the high and the medium. So if you look at the Asia, there are 3 countries classified or categorized as having extreme vulnerability, and 11 countries on the high vulnerability, and so on. 32 countries in the medium vulnerability, and 4 countries have the low vulnerability in Asia. So what should be done? What can we do? I think this is the main message I want to bring. Knowing the risk of future impacts on ecosystem on which human survival, well-being, and development depends, the ultimate need and goal should be to reduce this climate risk, and develop the climate resilient society. So hence, there is no one single approach, but multitude of approaches should be put in place. Even talking about 2 more main approaches, we mostly hear about mitigation and adaptation. This should start with assessment in understanding the location-specific magnitude of climate change, determining various mitigation and adaptation options, and creating enabling environment to undertake those mitigation and adaptation options. So without assessment in terms of what mitigation works we need to do, what mitigation will actually work, it is not possible without having that assessment. So assessment is, in my opinion, the first thing to do. Now, there can be many ways to do assessment with regard to assessment of the impact on the ecosystem and the likely impact, assessment of the main cause, the factors causing the impact, so that we can work on those causes to reduce the impact, to mitigate it. And there could be many such examples in every sector: energy, transport, agriculture, forestry, etc., etc. Now, this is just one example of that, how countries at the global level, people are preparing in providing the information. Now, with regard to assessment, we need to build this knowledge base on a lot of things, on the sectors, as I mentioned, okay, like agriculture, forest, water, etc., or human, like livelihood, health, etc., etc. So as climate change impacts are of long-term in nature, a lot of assessment work is underway elsewhere. Now, this is one example on the agriculture planning in the context of climate change, which is called as the Global Agroecological Journey, which is a global platform available, and we can immediately look at the information from here. So this platform serves as a decision support tool, providing information about land resources and the future productivity under different climate change scenarios known as RCPs. You are familiar with, there used to be SRES scenario, and now there was RCP, representative concentration pathway, and now they are talking about SSP, socioeconomic pathways. So these are basically, there are 4 or 5 scenarios. So this takes into account of what is likely, changes of the resources or the impact under this RCP. So this is just a snapshot. Actually, this can be accessed in the website. Now, accordingly, even the countries are working. So this is the recent work we have completed for Afghanistan in partnership with the government of Afghanistan and Food and Agriculture Organization. Countries are taking initiative, and this particular is the Land Resource Information Monitoring System management, or the LRIMS, Land Resource Information Management System, where again, as you can see here, RCP 4.5, this is a particular scenario of 4.5, but it has all that built up RCPs in between. Now, the purpose is to look at the likely impact in different scenarios. So that gives an opportunity to prepare that what should be our plan of action in terms of the strategies and activities to put in place in the certain sector. Now, with the assessment, we need to have the mitigation and the adaptation. First of all, in my opinion, we need assessment, and then certainly we need to put the mitigation and adaptation, which are must. Without that, we cannot deal with the climate change issue. Now, mitigation is to reduce emission of carbon dioxide and other GHG at the source of emission. It could be in energy sector or even agriculture sector. For example, the science says that the flooded paddy land, they are the huge source of the methane emission. So whatever activities we can put in there to reduce the methane emission, that is a mitigation. Now, mitigation is also sequestering or enhancing the sinks of the greenhouse gases. That is also the mitigation. It can have 2 approaches. For example, supply side improvements, that includes emission reduction. Say we have prevention of emission by conserving the existing carbon pool in soil and vegetation, that is emission reduction. Supply side improvements can be through sequestration, that is enhancing the removals, like afforestation, reforestation, etc. Supply side improvement can also have the substitution or avoiding or displacing the emission. For example, the use of the biofuels, in lieu of the fossil fuels. Similarly, demand-side measures approach can be also the part of the mitigations, like reducing the food loss. If we know that the expected food loss is of something like 30% or even more, and there is a lot of emission committed in case of the food loss. There are plenty of mitigation options available in every sector, in energy, in agriculture, forestry and other land use, buildings, transport, and so on. In some literature, you also find them called as mitigation technology or adaptation technology in case of adaptation. And sometimes in literature, you also find that hardware technology, software technology, or hardware technology. So basically, they point to the same meaning. The choice of mitigation options or technology can be based on the potential contribution to emission reduction or sequestration and appropriateness in local context, because we cannot have one kind of mitigation option in any given area. For example, in agriculture, it has to be the context specific, okay, that which particular technology or the option will work. So these are the examples in terms of what are those mitigation options in energy sector, in buildings, AFOLU, and so on. Okay, but this is just a very small list. There could be much longer mitigation options. I'm going to go to give some of the website where there is a comprehensive list of those mitigation options listed. Talking about choice and preference and smart emission reduction, this chart shows, for example, I should talk about the food loss. So this chart shows GHG emission from different kinds of food across the supply chain, such as land use change, farm, animal feed, processing, and so on. As shown here, to produce same amount of beef and maize, so GHG footprint is 60 times more compared to maize or cassava, the same amount of production. Okay, this is what I say demand side mitigation. So what can we do to mitigate? Okay, now it is the individual choice of the food item. So if we can change the behavior, then we are tremendously reducing the emission. So we can have such kind of life cycle assessment or the footprint for everything, whether it is transport. For example, we talk about the electric vehicle. So this is as compared to the fossil fuel vehicle. Electric vehicle has a smaller emission footprint. This is why people are talking about it. So there is such kind of opportunity in almost all the sectors. That was just the example. Now the next big thing, important thing, is the adaptation. It refers to adjustment in ecological, social, or economic system in response to actual or expected climate stimuli and their effects or impacts. So it basically refers to change in processes and practices and structure to moderate that potential damage we talk about. So in simple terms, countries and communities need to develop adaptation solution, okay, preparing ourselves to adapt to that developing the climate change impact situation. Because to deal with climate change mitigation only is not enough. As shown here, adaptation is very, very important. If we have more mitigation, we may have less adaptation. But if we have less mitigation, then we need even more adaptation. That is the condition. Now, similarly, there are plenty of such kind of adaptation options again, okay, in terms of different system, whether it is energy system, it is an urban system, it is in the land-based system, etc., etc. So these are the different categories of adaptation in terms of the economic, technological, industrial, social, and so on. Now, as I said earlier, actually, we have been working with the countries in the region. So we have worked with about 25, 26 countries in Asia, Unfortunately, not with India, but like country like Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, all around, Myanmar, and Thailand, of course, about 25, 26 countries. So this was about the technology needs assessment. So the governments were, they assessing that what technology in mitigation and adaptation they want to deploy in the coming future, 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years down the line. So there has been a lot of information become, that generated. So there is a web page called this Take Action Org, and there is something called as a fact sheet. Fact sheet is about one option, whether it is about the soil conservation or about the solar power or in irrigation, okay, that kind of one technological option, and it has all the details in terms of what it is, what are the economic feasibility, social feasibility, the benefit or the shortcomings and so on. So each of them is called as a fact sheet. There must be even more. Similarly, there are also reports for the countries. There are none for India because India has not participated yet, but for all other countries, those reports are there. So any interested student, you can take a look there. The website was already there. Now, as I already said, the IPC has just read all this new report. There is working group 1, 2, and 3 talking about the science and the impact and the vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a kind of excerpt from the IPCC 6, where IPC shows great expectations and go on saying that we can halve the emission by 2030 with a deep emission reduction. But the major transition needed in energy sector, particularly in the energy sector for the emission reduction. So the study I mentioned earlier about the technology need assessment, different countries have actually identified different sectors, as their priority sectors in terms of the mitigation and adaptations. Now, this is a general in terms of global level. Now, agriculture, forestry, and other land use can provide large-scale emission reduction and also sequestrations. However, land cannot compensate for delayed emission reduction because it has to go parallel. So if we only depend that, land can sequester, then this is not possible. So that's what it means. So it has to be attempted in all sectors. IPCC also said that there is sufficient global capital and liquidity in terms of financing to close the investment gap. However, the clear signal from the governments and the international community is needed to make it happen. So in a nutshell, if we put all the approach and attempt together, IPCC is, in its report, is very hopeful to reduce the emission at least by 50% by 2030. Now, there can be a lot of takeaways because I keep this talk as a general, but I like to just mention here that this COP26, which I also mentioned earlier, that was held last year in Glasgow. And this was the largest in the history, this meeting particularly attended by 120 world leaders and more than 38,000 delegates. Among all the COPs, this was the largest meeting ever. And there is this gentleman, Sir David Attenborough. He was the people advocate in that COP26 meeting. You may know that he is a natural historian and author and environmental advocate. So he gave a talk that is recorded in this YouTube link here, which is about 7 minutes long. And the meeting started with his talk first. He is urging the world leaders to work towards addressing the issues of the climate change. Okay, he says that climate change is an unavoidable impact, not for future generation, but for us and our younger generation at present. Okay, so if you have time, the student, you can quickly take a look. So my takeaway would be the climate change is the biggest threat to humanity and the ecosystem, and even in that matter, for all forms of life. Okay, it is really the issue. So we need to act now, no matter from what level, whatever we are. So if we start contributing even small action towards mitigation adaptation, then the cumulative effect will be something we can expect positively. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My email is listed there. And as also mentioned, I have this website where you can find about me. And if there is any interesting thing you found and you want to talk more in the future, then you can write the email to me. I probably took very long time and sorry for that. Thank you very much. I stop here. Over to Professor John, Professor Tripathi, Professor Rao.
Professor Tripathi, it is up to you now.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for your very nice, wonderful presentation.
If you need this slide, I will. This is rather a huge file because of the images.
Yes, sir.
I will try to make the PDF file and share to. Yeah, I have an email of Professor Rao. I can say to him.
Thank you so much, sir. Some of the participants, they have requested actually a presentation.
Yeah, I will send it. I will send it right after this.
So, sir, we have received certain queries from participants. So I will read those one by one for you. So the first question is asked by Sunil Pandey. He has asked, over the years, the sea level is seen rising 3.3 millimeter per year. Is the average trend line linear or can we hope to have a plateau in the curve?
That was the data reported as the average. As you know, that measuring the sea level itself is very difficult. If you have been to the coastal area, right? We know where is the beach is, where is the sea line, but measuring is very, very, very difficult precisely. There were attempts in the past to measure the sea level rise, and they actually reported, few meters, probably 30, 40 meter difference of the sea level at the same time in different parts of the ocean. So it certainly is not the linear, in my opinion. Okay, so this is the actually average figure of the whole part of the sea.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another question is also from the same person. So he has asked, please elaborate. Globally, average LSAT has risen faster 1.3 degree, 53 degrees Celsius than global mean surface temperature, 0.8 degrees Celsius.
Okay. Yeah, there were actually charts where one was on the global, that is the world average, and only the LSAT for the land part, terrestrial part. And there was also a chart on the ocean part, which is about 0.7. So considering the superficial area of the land part and the ocean part, as we know that the ocean covers about 75% of the surface. So that average of the land part and the ocean part make that the global mean. Okay, but if the purpose was, to take the meaning that the land part of temperature is much more higher, where our life depends. Although we go to the sea for different purposes, but then most of our time and our activities, the resources, the raw materials, it comes from the land. So I think that is the message, that the rise in the warming is much more. Now, with regard to average, yeah, this is the average between the sea and the land part to make the global average.
Okay, sir. So next question is from Provinath. She asked, can cloud seeding technology be used in drought-prone area to mitigate the effect? Also, is there any harmful effect of cloud seeding?
Yeah, that is interesting question, which I didn't touch upon. Yeah, I think what he's referring to is converting the moisture in the cloud and make the rain. Yes, actually, Rabindranath, right? actually this country, Thailand, do a lot of cloud seeding in here in the name of the King's project. The former king was very keen in creating that technology, and there is a department. There is a full-fledged department with the government, which is called as a Department of Rain Making, and this is exactly the cloud seeding. Since in cloud seeding you may use some kind of materials or chemicals, you may know it, right? So it may have some kind of negative impact. But considering, because when there is a rain, it comes to the rain, right? For example, we talk about acid rain, what it is. So some kind of chemicals come with acid rain, and that has a negative impact. Similarly, there can be, but considering the bigger benefit in the area which is a drought prone, probably cloud seeding technology can be very useful in those areas. And as I said, Thailand does a lot to relieve the problem of the farmers. So that when the farmers are in problem, they go and plead, say, okay, we don't have rain, please give us some rain. So department try to cooperate and create the rain, because it needs a lot of money. Okay? You need to fly the plane and do the cloud seeding. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Catherine. She has asked, which is the most accepted classification of climate, and how does climate change impact the variability of rainfall pattern?
Yeah, this is difficult in terms of the acceptance of the climate classification. For example, you might have heard Köppen, that is at the global level, broad level, we use it. Suppose, you may have known that some do climate classification. These are basically on the rainfall and temperature, but some may depend on the thermal efficiency, rainfall efficiency, okay, especially for agricultural planning. So in that case, the global level, like, this Köppen may not work, okay? But, on an average, large perspective, most of the literature, I think, tend to cite the Köppen classification. But suppose, if you have heard, like, there is classification system, for example, Papadakis, okay, which may be very specific to the agricultural planning, okay, where it is useful in small area to consider the small window of the weather pattern and then planning. Yeah. But there were a lot of other classifications in the past which considered only the temperature, which considered only the rainfall, which combined rainfall and temperature. But it was probably 1930, 1940, around that time. This Köppen was actually his thesis, who developed this classification system. So probably, most widely used in the literature. But as I said again, if you are working specifically on the irrigation planning or agriculture planning, then you may find some other modified or new type of the classification system more relevant. Now, with regard to the climate change impact on the rainfall pattern, now it is not the climate change impact on the rainfall. What we are defining as the change in that climate pattern is impacting, because there is a change in rainfall. So that is a climate change. As we say that climate is defined by what is these climate variables. For example, temperature, rainfall, the maybe humidity or wind, wind, whatever, of any given area. Now we are observing the changes in these climate variables. So this is the climate change. And so it has the impact. Normally, my way of seeing impact is that this changing climate has impact on something else. For example, creating drought, that is impact. Creating flooding, that is the impact. Okay, so that's what I like to elaborate on that. Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, sir. So next question is from Arunima P. It is very basic question actually, but anyway, I will read it. What is the difference between climate and weather?
Yeah, climate and weather is a short-term short-term atmospheric condition, like what we say in let's say in Mizoram, let's say maybe in December all the month is cold, okay, compared to April. Now, last year December was also cold, and last year April was hot, and so on. So if we see this pattern of this short-term variation, let's say in the climate or this atmospheric pattern, that is your weather. But given a year, this year, last year, January was like a January of last year, and so on. December was like the December of last year, and so on. Now that established pattern we perhaps call as the climate. So that is the difference. Weather is very short term. Like this morning, the atmospheric condition was different. It didn't rain, but after 2 hours, it is raining. Okay, so weather is this can be sometimes short term pattern.
Thank you, sir.
So average weather pattern will be your climate. Yeah.
So next question is from Elizabeth. She has asked, how can we talk about the very apparent effect of climate change to laymen who do not possess a background in science or lack the awareness and understanding of such topics in general?
Yeah, that is quite important actually. Probably it's no needed that we need to talk science with the laymen, but in understanding their views, and indeed there has been a lot of studies started, and people have observed, like my own students, they have done some study in Cambodia, Laos, or Myanmar, Nepal, and so on, talking to the people what they have observed, because they can recall, as these are the survey methodology, as with the recall methodology. So what was the, how cold it used to be, how hot it used to be in the past, or what used to be the ecosystem where they have observed, when it used to flower, not flower, etc., etc. So actually they have this information. Now, if we try to annotate, if you try to gather those information and put in the language climate change, I think it is very informative to even the science people like us, researcher, and also in communicating what the scientific information we have, because they also actually know, okay, in day-to-day life. So there is no need of bringing this science, like this kind of graphs to laymen, but talking to them and then connecting what the science says and what they have observed. And there will be probably, you will find very interesting story in terms of what they have observed, because there are a lot of studies done elsewhere, about the farmers or other kind of people, what they have been observing over the long runs. Thank you.
Sir. So next question is from Rita Sri Vardoloi. She has asked, it's been seen that climate change is drastically impacting the crop production, and basically in a developing nations like ours, the Himalayan region is very fragile. What will be the alternative way to cope up with the changes who are dependent on agriculture only? Also, the indigenous crop varieties are also under threat.
Yeah, could be. But there cannot be and should not be only one alternative way. Usually they say there is no silver bullet. So this is, as I said, multitude of the options. Now, certainly there could be the climate resilient variety, okay, and that is where research organization they work on. If including the research organization in India or global organizations, for example, CG Group. If you know CGIR, like there is ICRISAT in Hyderabad, there are about 15 of them. They do their own research, university does. The purpose is to develop those resilient variety. Certainly indigenous variety is resilient, but the science brought this all idea of hybridization, etc., to improve the production. So But there cannot be just one solution. It has to be many different solutions. Now, including resilient variety to drought, that could be one option. But then in the meantime, if it cannot give enough production, the farmers cannot earn enough livelihood, we also need to work on how they can adapt to that situation, maybe creating other income sources. Okay, so it's not dealing with the climate. Now, when we say income sources, it's not that simple again. Then we need to create the financing, create the job. We need to work with the policy, etc., etc. So the project which I cited earlier about the working with the governments, there actually is an intensive study done in terms of identifying the barriers. So if you want to have the climate resilient variety adopted by the farmers, then what are the barriers? Then how do we deal with that barriers and create the environment so that they will adopt? So there should be actually a number of the other activities put in place. And certainly the Himalayan region will be fragile because of many things. It may relate with the degradations of the ecosystem. Let's say land degradation, it is a huge issue in agricultural areas. And now we talk about the water scarcity, the melting, this and that. More importantly, if you see politically, which I don't want to mention here, but anyway, we also hear that even the rivers are, occupied. I mean, they have the ownership of the rivers, okay, which is a political reason and so on. So it's complex. Yeah, Ritasri, that is a good question. Thank you.
So thank you so much, sir, for addressing all the queries from participants. Now I would like to ask Professor O.P. Tripathi, sir, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Keshav. Before I put up the vote of thanks, I just want to know that our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sambasiva Rao, sir, want to say a few words.
I think he is busy.
It seems
he must be
sir
busy.
is in some meeting. Okay.
Oh, he is there.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rajendra ji. Actually, I was signing another file. That's why I could not immediately. So actually, the climate change in India, do you have any idea about how it is global warming increasing and temperature is going to be increased every year? Even in Mizoram, we are experiencing now very high temperature in Mizoram in the last few days, 3-4 days. Earlier, it is only 30, 31. But now we are experiencing 33, 35. Oh,
Actually, when it comes to climate change, India's brain has been the leading figures. I remember, earlier IPCC chair Dr. Rajendra Pachauri.
yes.
So actually, I had a few encounters in the sense that they, being together in the meetings, in some of the climate change meetings before he was the chair. But now also, if you look at the IPCC report, there are a lot of Indian researchers who are in the lead writing those chapters. Now, coming to your point, yes, certainly, I think, yes, because everywhere, even where I'm sitting here in this place, Bangkok, I am here for last 30 years. I came here in 1992. I observed a lot of changes with regard to the climate. So, which I mentioned earlier, that there is in every major news channel, like global news channel, CNN, BBC, etc., they are talking about this India and Pakistan heat waves now. That and probably this could be the effect in your place also, but that part is much more affected. And I also actually, showed some of the other news clips that how Indian agricultural scientists is worried about the heat or the warming on the agriculture this year. So it is certainly increasing. But I quickly look at your place and I could imagine that we have a lot of greens, lot of forest, yet you are experiencing warming. Most probably due to those, some of the impacts of those western heat waves, I guess.
No, my guess is that the deforestation at our place continuously been
It's a
one
lot.
of the activity that will be major reason for our increase of temperature, because our June cultivation and deforestation is very important factors too, maybe affecting the temperature
Yeah.
rise, I think.
Room cultivation, probably if it is seasonal, then that is a part of the life gas, but there is a permanent failing as the deforestation that could be. If it has increased a lot, certainly it will have impact. Certainly, yes, yeah.
Because even in our university, we are experiencing forest fire in our university in the last 2 years, particularly when rain delayed. So we got forest fire, and total we lost forest almost 1/3, 1/5 of the forest area of our university.
Right. Yeah. Maybe the people put the fire or what?
No, it is actually because of the some lack of rain. It has totally somewhere somebody might have done some fire activity that might have caught the forest fire, and it has took like that, and unable to control that. Unable to control.
Right. That is difficult to control the fire.
Yes, sir.
So the idea is to maintain the forest.
Yes.
Now, in this forest management principle, if there is a lot of fuel load in the forest, the likely fire will expand very quickly. Now, this natural forest fire is, and also sometimes human-induced forest fire is a huge problem in Southeast Asia region. For example, Indonesia, Malaysia, that part. And, sometimes it can be the regional. There was a situation a few years ago in Kuala Lumpur. The schools were closed for 7 days because of the ash coming from the forest fire.
Yes.
It was that huge. So certainly, I think the authority in the Mizoram should be thinking about it long term.
Yes,
it is
sir.
not something that you power, one bucket of water.
Yes, sir.
It is more integrated type of planning, in my opinion.
Sir, from my side, last question, last point only. So you are mentioning that several international projects you are handling. So is it possible to have a collaborative projects between Mizoram University and your institute?
Certainly, yes. We extend. We are looking forward for more collaboration.
Because we have people working in environmental science, forestry, and horticulture, 3 departments. No, they are concerned with botany and biotechnology. Also, they work in this area a little bit. So these 5 departments can collaborate with your institute, because I know Asian Institute of Technology is one of the best institute.
So we have in our school, that is School of Environment, we have agriculture, aquaculture, agriculture business, food, natural resource, the development planning, gender, energy, environmental engineering, and so on. So certainly, there will be a lot of areas of the mutual interest. And I also know that there was some provision where government of India and government of India, there was some provision for the research grant, and they could come to Thailand or collaborate with the Thai institution or universities. There are, because some of my colleagues, they are Indian. They have that kind of arrangement.
Yes, sir.
So that makes easier to to reconnect back to your home institute or even
Yes, sir.
home country.
I will look into that. If anything comes to your idea, please pass on the information to me. I can forward to my colleagues, sir. That I will do now. If anything coming to your information, please pass on that information to me, so that just remember Mizoram University is one of the partners for your institute.
Sure. It's very nice to know you. I have not been in that part. I actually graduated from Haryana Agriculture University
Yes,
long
yes,
ago, my bachelor degree.
yes, sir.
And when I was doing my undergrad there, I had a chance to visit some parts in the south and west, but not much to the east.
Yes, sir.
No,
you can.
but Delhi, I used to go. Yeah,
OP Tripathi is there. We will have a collaboration and we will invite you sometime like that. We'll plan to have like that.
Yeah, please do. Whatever help we can extend, we will be willing to do that, because AIT does not actually belong to Thailand. AIT is the regional institution. It has no one country as the owner.
Yes.
So it is independent, autonomous institution,
Yes.
not belonging to any country.
Okay.
So we are not the Thai institution, although based in Thailand. And Thailand is a great help because Thailand give the land, it give the buildings, it also provides some financial support, so on. So what I mean is we want to work regionally, actually. Okay, certainly, yes, yeah. Thank you for the offer. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Over to John.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Definitely, we will come up with some these interactive collaborative program with Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. So now we have come up to put the formal vote of thanks. So I, OP Tripathi, on behalf of Mizoram University, I take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks to those who have directly or indirectly contributed to this webinar, that is on Let's Talk About the Climate Change, organized by the Mizoram University. At the outset, I thank our resource person, Professor P. Rajendra P. Shrestha, Dean, the School of Environmental Research and Development, CERT, Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. We are really enlightened with your knowledge, sir. You have taken within a short time local to global level scenario on the status trends on the climate change, particularly emphasizing on the various RCPs and approaches for mitigation and all. So we thank you, Professor Shrestha. I, on behalf of organizing committee, convey my deep regards with hearty thanks to our vibrant and dynamic Vice Chancellor, Honorable Professor K.R.S. Sambasiva Rao sir, for his constant guidance, ever encouragement, and all possible support to shape such programs very frequently and to make such events very successful. So I thank Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R.S. Sambasiva Rao sir. I am also thankful to the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Registrar, Finance Officer, System Administrator, ICT, who is hosting this program and to making uninterrupted. So for their all possible logistic supports and all to make this webinar to the grand success. I am very much thankful to all our faculty colleagues and the non-teaching staff members who always stands and motivated us to host such program successfully. I feel proud and thank you for making this event a grand success. I would like to express also my gratitude to all esteemed panelists of today's program and valuable participants for their presence and contributing this program great success. I cannot thank each and everyone enough for their involvement at every level, who have shown their willingness and have expressed to take the completion of task successfully. Thank you one and all. Thank you, Professor Rajendra Shrestha. A very good afternoon.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much for this opportunity to connect to all of you.
Yeah. We call it Khapum Khap.
Khabun Khap.
Thank you.
Thank you,
one and all.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
keep
you,
in touch. Yeah, please keep in touch. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.